There is a strange assumption baked into how most players shop for a 5-string bass, and it is quietly costing people a fortune. Because a 5-string costs more to build than a 4, has 1 extra string's worth of tension and hardware to get right. And so the internet has trained everyone to believe cheap and 5-string simply cannot coexist. That belief is completely, provably wrong. Right now, sitting on shop walls and in secondhand listings that nobody scrolls past, are 5-string basses that deliver a genuinely usable low B, real build quality, and honest tone for a fraction of what the hype basses cost. Today, 12 cheap 5-string basses that almost everyone ignores, and every single one is a real gold mine, not a compromise. Stay with me to number 12, the single most ignored 5-string gold mine in the used market, the one that will genuinely embarrass a brand new 5-string costing triple. And number 3 is the 5-string that keeps landing in independent reviews as the best value low B on the entire market, at a price that makes people assume it must be a toy. Along the way, the actual physics of why cheap B strings used to fail, and exactly what to check before you hand over money on any 5-string, cheap or expensive. Everything mentioned is linked in the description, so you can check every claim yourself. A quick honest note before we start. Nobody paid for this video, no brand, no shop, and every clip from other creators you're about to see is used muted for commentary with the channel credited on screen. The links below are plain product links, no affiliate games. And because buying right is a method, not a list, the complete buyer's guide, every gold mine and money trap from this channel as one honest map is linked in the description. Now let's get into it. Worth 60 seconds on why cheap 5-strings actually earned that floppy B reputation in the first place. Because understanding the failure tells you exactly what to check. A low B string is thick, under lower tension, and vibrates with a wider physical swing than the other 4 strings. Cut costs in the wrong 3 places, a nut slot filed too shallow, a bridge saddle spacing that doesn't give the B enough room, or a pickup pole piece that isn't positioned to actually sense that wider string swing, and you get the classic cheap 5-string symptoms. A B that buzzes against the frets, sits noticeably quieter than the other strings, or just sounds vague and undefined instead of a note. None of that is expensive to fix at the factory. It just requires someone to actually set the nut, bridge, and pickup spacing correctly for 5 strings, instead of bolting a 5th tuner onto a 4-string design and calling it done. Every bass on this list gets that right. A lot of basses this channel would never recommend don't. Number 1. The Ibanez GSR205. This is the 5-string sibling of the GSR200. The bass working session players quietly keep as their beat-up backup, and the 5-string version inherits every reason why. Around $250 gets you that famously thin, fast Ibanez neck extended to 5 strings without becoming a plank. A genuinely usable low B that doesn't flop or buzz. And the active Fat 2 EQ circuit dialing in a low end far bigger than the price tag suggests. Written off as a beginner 5-string, it's actually one of the most quietly gigged budget 5-strings on the planet. Number 2. The Yamaha TRBX305. Yamaha's TRBX line gets constantly overshadowed by the pricier BB series, and the 5-string TRBX305 pays the price for that shadow. For around $350, you get a real active passive switchable circuit, a 5-way tone selector versatile enough to cover almost any style, and the kind of Yamaha build consistency that simply never surprises you badly. It is not the 5-string anyone talks about first. It is the one that keeps working, gig after gig, while louder names get all the comments. Number 3, the one worth waiting for. The Sterling by Music Man SUB Ray5. Independent reviewers keep landing on the same verdict on this one. A licensed, genuine Stingray design, the same single humbucker in the same sweet spot that built that unmistakable, aggressive, punchy growl, now extended to a real 5-string with a low B that actually holds its pitch and definition for around $350 to $400. One reviewer flatly called it the king of budget 5-strings after testing it directly against pricier competition and after hearing it back-to-back with basses twice the price. It's hard to argue with that verdict. What makes this one specifically worth the wait rather than an impulse buy on the first 5-string you see? Music Man licenses the actual Stingray design to Sterling, so this isn't a copy chasing the sound from memory. It's the real pickup position and body geometry that created the growl in the first place, just built in Indonesia instead of California. This is the official, licensed budget version of one of the most iconic bass tones ever recorded, and almost nobody shopping under $500 thinks to ask for it by name. Number 4. The Sire Marcus Miller V305. Everyone chases the Sire V7's active preamp and forgets the V3 comes in a 5-string too, at around $350. You still get a genuine onboard active preamp, that famously slim, fast Sire neck now spread across 5 strings without losing playability, and the same Marcus Miller design pedigree the V7 gets praised for. Reviewers who expect a compromised low B are consistently surprised at how defined and usable it actually is. Everyone is looking at the flagship. The real steel sits one shelf down. Number 5. Harley Benton 5-string edition. The same reason Harley Benton dominates the 4-string budget conversation applies here, just louder, because 5 strings usually carry a bigger price jump, and Harley Benton simply refuses to add one. As Thoman's in-house brand, there's no middleman, no distributor markup, just instrument straight from factory to buyer. The JB5 and PJ5 deluxe models, alder or basswood bodies, maple necks, genuinely usable electronics, run around $180 to $250 for a complete, gig-capable 5-string. One independent reviewer called an early unit flat-out stunning for the money. Strip away every ounce of markup, and a real 5-string for beginner bass money is what's left. Number 6. The Cort Action V+. Cort manufactures instruments under contract for a long list of famous names, the same factory, the same hands, the same quality control, and then sells basses under their own name without the big brand markup stacked on top. The Action V+, around $300, brings that exact factory-grade build to a 5-string, a comfortable neck profile, usable active electronics, and the kind of fit and finish that quietly outperforms its price tag. Ignoring Cort means ignoring the builder behind half the brand's players actually worship. Number 7. The ESP Ltd B205. Metal and rock players walk past this one purely because the price makes them suspicious of an ESP badge, and that suspicion costs them a genuinely great instrument. Around $300 gets a thin, fast, modern neck built for extended range comfort, an active circuit voice to cut through a heavy mix, and ESP's reputation for build quality brought down to earth. For a player who wants a modern, aggressive 5-string rather than another vintage-style copy, the B205 is a ferociously good deal, hiding behind a name people assume they can't afford. Number 8. The Ibanez SR305E, a different Ibanez, a different 5-string philosophy. Instead of the GSR's beginner bass roots, the SR305E brings Ibanez's SR body shape, a real active 3-band EQ, and that signature ultra-thin SR neck to a 5-string for around $350. It's the bass players reach for when they want a modern, versatile low-end without the boutique price of the higher SR series. The SR name carries real weight in the bass world. The 305 just doesn't get any of the credit. Number 9. The Schecter Stiletto Stealth 5. Schecter built its reputation on extended range, active electronics basses for players who need serious low-end, and the Stiletto Stealth 5, around $400, brings that exact philosophy to a genuinely affordable price point. Active EQ, a neck built specifically for 5-string comfort, and a tone voiced for modern rock and metal rather than a vintage compromise. Players hunting for an aggressive, extended-range 5-string usually assume that voicing starts at $600 or $700. The Stealth 5 proves it doesn't. Number 10. The Squier Affinity Jazz Bass Voix. The Affinity name gets dismissed as pure beginner gear on the 4-string, and that snobbery follows the 5-string version too, which is a mistake because the licensed Fender jazz bass body shape and pickup layout, extended cleanly to 5 strings for around $280, is one of the most upgradable, moddable five-string platforms that exist. A slim, comfortable neck, the single most recognizable bass silhouette on Earth, and a canvas that welcomes better pickups and hardware whenever you're ready. Dismissed as the cheap five-string jazz, it's actually the smartest project bass entry point in this entire list. Number 11. The used Peavey Milestone 5-string. Peavey basses sit ignored on used shelves for a very simple reason. The brand has no hype machine, no influencer army, nothing except decades of American-designed instruments built to survive being gigged into the ground. The Milestone 5-string, when you find one used for well under $200, brings surprisingly punchy pickups and tank-like hardware that keeps working long after flashier basses have needed repairs. Unfashionable does not mean bad. On the used market, unfashionable very often just means cheap. Number 12. And here it is, the single most ignored 5-string goldmine in the entire bass world. The 1990s Japanese and Korean-built 5-strings that nobody remembers to want. A made-in-Japan Yamaha RBX 5-string, a Korean-era Ibanez SR305, an old Washburn or Aria 5-string buried in a pawnshop rack. These were built during the golden era of Asian manufacturing, when 5-string demand was new enough that manufacturers over-engineered the B-string spacing rather than cutting corners on a feature nobody had mass-produced yet, to a standard that shames most brand-new budget 5-strings. And because the badge is unfamiliar and the bass is old, they sit priced at $150, $200, often less, right next to basses half as good, wearing a more recognizable name. A clean vintage Japanese or Korean 5-string at that price is the closest thing to a guaranteed gold mine in this entire hobby. The badge is dead. The instrument underneath very often plays better than anything new you could buy for triple the money. One practical scenario before the honest objections, because which one of these 12 is the question this video actually needs to answer? If you're a beginner who just needs a real working 5-string without overthinking it, the Ibanez GSR205 or the Squier Affinity Jazz Vi, both forgiving, both cheap enough that a mistake costs nothing. If you specifically want that stingray growl and are willing to wait and save toward the top of this list, the Sterling SUB Ray5, no contest, that's what the licensing exists for. If you're hunting the used market and have the patience to actually test before buying, the vintage Japanese or Korean sleeper at number 12 beats everything else here on pure build quality per dollar. But only if you run the Sign 2 B-string test in person first, since used market quality varies unit to unit in ways a factory-fresh Harley Benton or Cort simply doesn't. Before the honest objections, 3 signs of an ignored 5-string gold mine you can use in any shop. Sign 1. The logo is unfamiliar or unfashionable. That's not a red flag, that's the discount. The badge makes no sound. The wood, the neck, and the nut spacing do. Sign 2. Check the B-string specifically using exactly the physics from a minute ago, because this is where cheap 5-strings actually fail or succeed. Fret it up and down the neck listening for looseness or buzz that isn't there on the other 4 strings, and play it through an amp comparing its volume against the other strings. A good cheap 5-string keeps the B tight, defined, and equally loud the whole way up the neck. Sign 3. Play it unplugged, pressed against your body. If it resonates and sustains acoustically, no missing hype changes what you're holding, and a B string that resonates unplugged will almost always translate through an amp too. Now the honest objections answered fast. Objection 1. Cheap 5-strings have a floppy, useless B string. That was true a generation ago on genuinely bad budget hardware, back when manufacturers really did just bolt a 5th tuner onto a 4-string design. On every bass on this list, the nut, bridge, and pickup spacing were actually built for 5 strings from the start, so the B is a real, usable string, not an afterthought. Check it yourself with the Sign 2 test above before you believe otherwise. Objection 2. You cannot get a professional low end from a cheap 5-string. Tone comes from your hands, your strings, your setup, and your amp in that order, long before price enters the conversation, and a proper setup transforms the B string specifically, often more than any other string on the instrument. Objection 3. Resale value. A $300 5-string has almost nothing left to lose, while the $1,000 one loses value the moment you carry it out the door, and 5 strings hold their percentage value about as well as 4 strings do once you're shopping used anyway. You are not gambling on any bass in this list. You are buying freedom, 5 strings worth. So there's the whole map. 12 cheap 5 strings the world ignores, and every single one a genuine steal. Here's the idea to take away. The price gap between a good cheap 5-string and an expensive one has almost nothing to do with the low B actually working, and almost everything to do with a badge. The players who understand that are gigging real 5-string tone for a fraction of the money, while everyone else assumes cheap and 5-string can't be said in the same sentence. Tell me in the comments which of these you've played, or which cheap 5-string changed your mind about the low B. Was it a budget Ibanez, a Harley Benton nobody warned you about? A pawn shop Japanese sleeper you found for nothing? Drop it below. Everything mentioned is linked in the description, including the buyer's guide with the complete map of gold mines and money traps. Subscribe for honest, no-hype truth about bass gear, and I'd be genuinely glad to have you along for the ride.